I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, expecting to enjoy a quiet weekend. But as soon as I looked to my left, my heart sank. My fence, the one I had carefully built with my own hands, was gone. It wasn't just knocked over or damaged. It had been completely torn down, dismantled by the HOA without any warning. I felt my blood boil. How dare they? This was my property, my land, and they had no right to do this. But then I realized something they didn't know. I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the neighborhood lawyer, the one who understood property law like the back of my hand. I had dealt with disputes and contracts for years, but this was personal. The HOA had crossed a line. They thought they could simply push me around, but I was prepared to make them regret it. They had no idea who they were messing with. Karen, the HOA president, was the one behind this. She was notorious for her overbearing rules and complete disregard for anyone else's property rights. Her control over the neighborhood was like a vice grip, and I had seen her take advantage of homeowners time and time again. But now, it was my turn to fight back. I wasn't going to let her dictate how I lived on my own land. I had the knowledge, and I would use it to bring her down. I stood there, staring at the destruction in front of me. The fence that had once marked the boundary of my property was now nothing but broken wood and twisted metal. The anger that boiled inside me was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't act on impulse. I had to deal with this the right way. The HOA couldn't just tear down what was mine. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a violation. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office. The phone rang a few times before someone picked up, their voice calm, almost dismissive. HOA office, how can I help you? I took a deep breath. I need to speak to someone about the fence you demolished on my property. The woman on the other end sighed, as if this was an inconvenience. It's just a fence, sir. It's part of the community improvement project. We've been making improvements across the neighborhood. My grip tightened around the phone. I could feel my frustration building. You have no idea who you're dealing with, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't about some community project. This is about my property, and I'm not going to let you get away with this. The woman seemed to hesitate for a moment. Sir, we'll have someone look into it. Her tone was dismissive, as if brushing me off was enough, but I knew this wouldn't end here. I had legal knowledge, and I was ready to use it. The HOA had underestimated me. I had a choice, let it go or escalate, and there was no way I was letting this go. They would regret messing with the wrong person. The HOA's response to my initial complaint had been frustratingly vague. They promised to look into it, but I could tell they had no intention of actually addressing the issue. Every call I made to their office was met with the same robotic apology. I knew it was time to stop waiting for them to do the right thing. If I was going to get justice, I had to take matters into my own hands. I dove into property records, zoning, laws, and HOA regulations, digging deeper than I had ever done before. My mind raced as I sifted through the paperwork, trying to find any loophole, any violation that would give me leverage. As the hours passed, my frustration began to grow. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the HOA wasn't just guilty of tearing down my fence. They were guilty of systematically overstepping their authority. Their community improvement project was just a cover for something bigger. I found evidence that they had been using their influence to manipulate property values, forcing homeowners to comply with their rules in exchange for favors. They had been taking advantage of their position, targeting vulnerable homeowners who didn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. My fence was just one of many cases, a small part of a larger scheme they had been running unchecked for years. The more I learned, the more my blood began to boil. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about corruption and abuse of power. The HOA president, Karen, had been at the center of it all, using her position to benefit from the very people she was supposed to serve. They had crossed a line, and now they would face the consequences. But as I sat in my office, my legal documents spread out in front of me, I couldn't ignore the gnawing fear at the back of my mind. The HOA had far more resources than I did. They had lawyers, money, and influence. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of retaliation they might throw my way. Would they go after my career? Would they use their power to make my life miserable, in ways I couldn't anticipate? I shook my head, pushing those doubts aside. I had taken an oath to defend the law and fight for justice, and I wasn't going to let the fear of retaliation stop me. I had already uncovered enough evidence to expose the HOA for what they were, corrupt and abusive. Now, I just had to make sure the world knew what they had been doing. The battle was far from over, but I knew that, with my legal expertise, I could take them down. The community meeting was packed. The room buzzed with voices as neighbors gathered, all curious about what was going to happen. They knew something big was coming, especially after the HOA had caused such a stir with their heavy-handed decisions. As I entered the room, I could feel every eye on me. I had prepared for this moment for weeks. Today, I wasn't just a concerned homeowner. I was ready to bring down the HOA. I walked up to the podium, my legal files in hand. The board members, including Karen, the HOA president, sat at the front, looking calm and composed, as though they were used to getting their way. But I wasn't intimidated. I had the truth on my side. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady but firm, "I am here today because the HOA has violated my property rights. Not only did you tear down my fence without my consent, but your actions are illegal, and I have the evidence to prove it." I laid a stack of documents on the table, the sound echoing in the quiet room. The papers contained the zoning laws, property records, and legal precedents that would expose the HOA's corruption. Karen shot me a sharp look, her lips curling into a smug smile. "You think we have time for your complaints, Mr. Carter?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is a community meeting, not a court hearing. We've already made our decisions." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about everything they had done to this neighborhood. "You tore down my fence without consent, and that's just the tip of the iceberg," I said, my voice louder now, filled with authority. "The real issue here is how you've been manipulating zoning laws and exploiting the system to benefit yourselves. You think you can just get away with it because you control the neighborhood? Well, you're wrong, and I'm about to show you why." Karen's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't scare me with legal jargon, Mr. Carter," she sneered. "You're just one person. We have the support of the entire community." I smiled back, knowing this was my moment. "You're right about one thing. I am just one person. But I'm not just any person." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of my next words settle. "I'm the neighborhood lawyer, and I've spent my career fighting for what's right. I've seen through your lies, your manipulation, and your corruption. And now I'm here to make sure you face the consequences." The room went silent. I could see Karen's face pale, the arrogant confidence she had worn so proudly beginning to crack. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the weight of what was happening. I wasn't just some homeowner protesting a small issue. I had the legal knowledge to bring them down, and I wasn't afraid to use it. "I have all the evidence right here," I said, pointing to the stack of papers in front of me. "The zoning violations, the illegal construction, the way you've exploited your position for personal gain. This is not just about a fence. It's about the way you've been abusing your power for years. And I'm not going to let it go unchallenged." The tension in the room was thick now. The board members exchanged glances, but Karen was still trying to hold onto her grip. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "You'll never win." But the cracks were already showing. The other members were slowly coming to terms with the reality of the situation. They couldn't hide behind Karen's lies anymore. They couldn't ignore the truth that I had just laid out for them. I stood tall, my gaze fixed firmly on Karen. "You've underestimated me, Karen, and you've underestimated the people in this neighborhood. We're not going to sit back and let you walk all over us any longer." My voice carried the weight of years of frustration and anger, but also a sense of pride. I was doing this not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been taken advantage of by this corrupt system. The board was no longer in control of the conversation. I had turned the tables. I wasn't just fighting for my fence. I was fighting for justice, for accountability, and for the future of the entire neighborhood. The fight had only just begun, and I wasn't going to stop until the HOA was held accountable for everything they had done. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. I stood there, my heart racing, as the judge listened intently to the final arguments. The HOA had tried to fight me every step of the way, using their lawyers, their resources, and their influence to make sure their illegal actions went unnoticed. But it didn't matter how much money they threw at it. They couldn't hide the truth. The moment the judge's gavel struck the desk, I knew the battle was over. "The court has ruled in favor of the plaintiff," the judge announced, his voice steady. "The HOA will be responsible for the damages, and the fence will be rebuilt at their expense. Additionally, they will be subject to a substantial fine for their violations of property rights and misuse of their position." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long, the anxiety and doubt that had gnawed at me throughout the case was suddenly lifted. This wasn't just about the fence. It was about proving that power, when abused, could be taken down. It was about making sure that the HOA couldn't manipulate the neighborhood anymore. As I walked out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of the neighborhood residents gathered outside, their faces filled with pride and relief. The community had rallied behind me, offering support, signing petitions, and showing up to meetings. They knew this fight wasn't just mine. It was for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the HOA. And we had won. The victory was theirs, too. I looked at the street where my house stood, where the old fence had been torn down. Soon, a new one would be built. But it wasn't just the fence that had been rebuilt. It was trust. Trust in the system, trust in the law, and trust in each other. I reflected on how far I had come. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that when we stand up for what's right, we can make a difference. I had always believed in justice, but today I had proven that justice could prevail, even against the most powerful forces. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't the end. The HOA had learned a valuable lesson, and the neighborhood had learned something too. That when we stand together, we can hold those in power accountable. As I walked down the street, the familiar faces of my neighbors greeted me with smiles and nods. The sun was setting behind the houses, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in my chest. The fence that had been torn down by the HOA was being rebuilt, this time with a stronger foundation, both literally and symbolically. It wasn't just about the physical fence anymore. It was about reclaiming our rights and restoring the power that the HOA had tried to take from us. The once overbearing presence of the HOA had faded. They no longer held the same control over us. We had stood together, united against their manipulation, and come out victorious. The community had grown stronger in the face of adversity, and I had learned something invaluable through this journey. Standing up for what's right doesn't just change the system, it changes you. I paused for a moment, at the edge of the sidewalk, looking around at the homes that made up the heart of this neighborhood. This wasn't just my victory. It was the victory of everyone who had ever been pushed around, ignored, or silenced. The justice we had fought for wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. And in the end, we had all won. As I stood there, taking in the scene, I knew this was a moment I would remember forever. The fight for justice had been long, but it had brought us all together. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.